Thank you. Good morning. Distinguished participants, I want to thank ICT for the invitation to be part of these deliberations. Furthermore, I want to say how glad I am to be in Israel, whose experience with terrorism, unfortunately, knows few equals. It is a chance for me to listen and learn. But for the next few minutes, allow me to speak of Kenya and the way we are thinking and acting on the terrorist threat. How do we unpuzzle terrorism? And I want to give you a glimpse of how we think about it and how we feel about it, because it is by understanding our perspective that we're able to partner more effectively. I think my most important task, really, in my job is to better understand the way our political will operates in the prosecution of this fight, to understand the nature and aims of our enemies, what precisely is at stake for Kenya, and what actually constitutes victory for us and for them. It is the answers to these questions that animate our response to terrorism, either by making it effective and responsive and adaptive, or of course making it ineffective. Let me start by saying Kenya is a democracy. We're also a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and multicultural country that for 50 years has sought to forge itself into a unified nation. Democracy in the form of competitive politics, the right of self-expression, religion and association in our diversity is a necessity in negotiating the terms of our nationhood. We have learned that the hard way, courtesy of being colonized and experiencing authoritarian forms of government while we were independent. However, today, we have a democratic constitution that is owned by the people. We have a growing economy that is building a vibrant middle class, and we have a noisy but free political space, a free media, and a tradition for interfaith harmony. We're also a country that has been under constant attack by terrorist groups, by Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, and with ISIS also seeking to join in this unfortunate circumstance. Yesterday we continued, or the day before yesterday, we continued to condole with the American people for the savagery of the 9/11 attacks and the great loss of Americans and many other nationalities on that day. Doing so also reminded us that Al-Qaeda started its reign of mass murder in Kenya in 1998 when they attacked the US embassy. Including that attack, almost 900 Kenyans have been killed by terrorists and thousands more injured until the end of last year. The attacks on the Westgate Mall and on Garissa University College were a deep trauma to our citizens, and they sparked a determined effort by the government of President Uhuru Kenyatta to change the way we do our business. In this regard, I really want to acknowledge with gratitude the important cooperation we have with the State of Israel and with several more important allies who are represented here. In every major attack we have suffered, our friends have rallied to our side, and we are very grateful for such solidarity. And I want to say that Prime Minister Netanyahu visited Nairobi just recently. And I think we're very glad because President Uhuru Kenyatta put the matter very plainly. He said to the world that Israel is a friend and ally of Kenya. He said to the world that it is wrong that Israel should not be an observer at the African Union, and that Kenya would take up the cause of advocating for Israel's return to observer status. This was a reflection of the friendship we feel for the people of Israel and our understanding that we have come to a time in our history where we need deeper and clearer clarity about who our friends are. As horrifying as the attacks on Kenyans have been, the numbers dead in comparison with other forms of violent death remain modest. More Kenyans have been murdered by intercommunal conflicts over land and resources, more still by the tragedy of our post-election violence in 2008. So why then should terrorism be an important national priority? This is the key question, because there are many who argue that it should not be, that in effect what we are dealing with should be regarded as one crime against many, and our response to it should be more in keeping with our other criminal justice approaches. Our President Kenyatta has gone the opposite way and declared terrorism the most serious threat, security threat facing Kenya. That is in terms of its desire to strike at the heart of our social cohesion and political stability. That because terrorism has no ceiling on the physical, political, and cultural damage it can cause. The aim of terrorist groups, we believe, is nothing less than the destruction of the free world and its democratic tenets. The numbers killed so far may be lower than those caused by cigarettes, for instance. I usually see that example in articles of people saying counterterrorism is overdone. But we are aware that the ideology of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, IS, Al-Shabaab, is inherently genocidal. They have no upside limit to what damage they can do to our people. And so we cannot rest and say only 900 people have died. We have to say these people are willing to go all the way. And that is why we have to face them with every bit of resource that we have. Now, the ideology. I have heard some of the speakers here focus on the ideology, and I think in Kenya, until now, we have not been that clear about focusing on this particular aspect, but we are now. And what we term, and what many of you term as Salafi jihadism, or what in Kenya is called Salafi Jadid, the new Salafism, sort of the violent Salafism, is what is cohering, allowing these people to recruit and motivate people to kill Kenyans. We believe that this ideology must be delegitimized, and those that carry it forward and fund it and propagate it are committing a crime, and they must be stopped not only in Kenya, but everywhere else in the world. There are others who tell us that terrorists are in their own misguided way responding to commissions and omissions of the state, that they are marginalized, poor, jobless, and therefore angry and willing to act out violently. This is a view that is particularly popular with non-governmental organizations that are sponsored by some of our best friends. Because ours, unfortunately, is too often in Kenya an identity-based politics, very ethnicized. The accusation of marginalization is seized on by a spectrum of local and national actors and echoed with great volume in the multilateral and international NGO space. So if you Google Kenya terrorism causes, the whole first page of Google will tell you about marginalization. And you will conclude that the government that I serve somehow, perversely, is responsible for what has happened. The thing is that part of this story may even be true. There have been patterns of neglect by past governments of different populations in our country. But this is a matter of history, because the adoption of our new constitution 6 years ago has led to an unprecedented investment all over the country in the well-being of the people. And that is to say that I believe that at the heart of the international apprehension of this threat, and nationally too, especially amongst our civil society, there's a powerful misdiagnosis of the threat. In fact, not only a misdiagnosis, but the disconcerting notion that the patient is responsible for the illness. There are few studies globally that conclude that terrorism is a weapon of the weak and destitute. Sure, the conditions of poverty, joblessness, and the conduct of the state have an important place in creating a particular ecosystem, but these are not the cause. I believe that misdiagnosing this threat leads to lethal ends for countries and societies, that seek to resist and overcome it. It is not marginalization or joblessness, it is simply hatred. They hate Kenya for being a small and struggling democracy. They hate us for not taking their attacks lying down and being determined enough in our response to go over the border into Somalia in pursuit of al-Shabaab. They hate that we chased al-Shabaab out of its strongholds and cut it from its vital source of funding in Kismayu. They hate us for refusing to rise to their bait of driving a violent wedge between our Christian and Muslim population. They hate that we have freedom of religion within Islam and also within other religions. And they hate our tradition of interfaith harmony. They hate that their fringe sect, with its adherence to hateful violence, does not enjoy the popular support they seek. Most of all, they hate Kenya because we have refused to capitulate to their vision of the world. I believe that Kenya is a living denial of claims that groups like Al-Qaeda are somehow a reflection of the downtrodden people of the world. I believe that Kenya is at the front lines of a global war for liberty and the values of free societies. I also believe that it is in Kenya where this war will be won or lost for everybody. Western countries may succeed for a while in building fences and walls that protect them to an extent. They may erect sophisticated and costly technologies that we may not be able to afford. But in the final reckoning, without countries like Kenya succeeding to grow into the prosperous democracies that we want to become, the ideas that are advanced through the savage violence of the terrorists will be ascendant and will eventually sink all of us. These are the stakes, and it is why Kenya seeks partners who understand us as we understand ourselves, and who can stand with us in our fight. It is our challenge for our part to constantly be aware of the profound nature of the threat before us. What I'm proposing, ladies and gentlemen, is that as important and as unpuzzling the nature and the threat of terrorism itself is unpuzzling our own efforts to counter it. Because that is actually possibly a more important task. How you perceive and feel the threat is key to how you respond. Our CT efforts can never exceed our will for the fight, nor can we have a training or capacity building program for the will. You know, IDC is great school, but you can't teach people to be ready to fight and to be ready to defend themselves. And so what is crucial for our people is for their will to remain strong and to not be ridden down by irresponsible media, by wrong prescriptions by our friends and some of the NGOs that they sponsor. Our will is the most important thing, and you must support it to be constantly strengthened as opposed to it being constantly questioned. I want to spend the final minute or so speaking about some of the actual things that we're doing so that you understand some of them. The first thing is that we border Somalia, and we share a 700-kilometer border. It used to be a collapsed state. Now it's an extremely fragile state. And within it, al-Shabaab is still operating. As long as Somalia is not stable, Kenya will not be able to actually enjoy security in the long term. And so I think there is grounds for the international community to see a military victory over al-Shabaab in Somalia to be a win for all of us. Certainly it'll be a win for Kenya, but it'll be a win for all of us in terms of the worldwide struggle against terrorism. Someone here said yesterday that success follows success, and the inverse is also true. So why can't we make the military defeat of al-Shabaab a success? And then the other politics and other issues will follow and are continuing or will be concurrent, but it must begin with them being eliminated as an organization. On the domestic front, I direct a multi-agency center that from last year was given a legal mandate to engage the public on issues of counterterrorism, to counter radicalization and build our state and national capacity to succeed in this fight. The president brought us into his executive office to help us coordinate with every part of government, but it was also a signal for him to the country and to the government about how important he considered this particular fight. In the last 18 to 24 months, Kenyan security has transformed significantly, and the number of attacks that we have experienced and the number we have been able to stop have increased. The leadership of the national security agencies has been changed with a very strong expectation by our president that we will all work in the same direction. And I think the response has been very positive. At the same time, the public's response to attacks such as that one at the Garissa University College, where 148 young Kenyans were killed, has really seen an increase in the amount of information that is coming into the security services. We've also passed laws that have strengthened and given us more tools. Really, the result of these tools and public participation has been for more cases being brought and prosecutions for terrorist-related crimes. In fact, one of the big headaches that I face in terms of engaging to help is our already overcrowded prisons and how we can have the space, the skills, and the equipment to deal with the increasing number of terrorist convicts. And we have, as I said, we have been stopping more attacks. And if you look at the number of attacks being prosecuted in Kenya and their impact, you will see that there is a significant downward trend. That's why I'm very interested in the panel tomorrow on Libya, Nigeria, and Kenya. And as I quote, it says the new battlefield for global jihadist organizations. It seems very alarming. I don't think Kenya is the new battlefield for global jihadist organizations. It is a front. There is a battle there, but I don't think it's the scale of attacks or their success really speaks to us being at such a point. Of course, we remain under a strong threat, but I think we have shown our ability to adapt and to improve our response to the enemy. Now, I want to finish by focusing a bit on foreign terrorist fighters who I know many of you are concerned about. In Kenya, we have had hundreds of Kenyans traveling to Somalia to fight with Al-Shabaab and a few going to Libya to fight with IS. In April 2015, we announced a conditional amnesty to fighters that sought to disengage and had not undertaken attacks against us. The response was very strong, and we ran a pilot program to disengage and reintegrate them back into lawful life in Kenya. The lessons of this effort continue to trickle in, and the pickup by disgruntled fighters has been a blow to Al-Shabaab. But this effort, I'm sure, as you can understand, has a high degree of risk. We have been tasked as the NCTC to coordinate the creation of a stronger framework that has a strong risk assessment approach at its heart in distinguishing targets for investigation and intelligence collection as opposed to those who we can now begin to perhaps disengage and take to a different path. I was actually very interested in Honorable Minister Bennett's comments on risk-based authentication yesterday and thought that it was exactly on the money. But how you do it is really the trick. We have developed a tool that we are now rolling out in the different security agencies, and I hope that it's going to be good enough to allow us to distinguish between the really bad seeds and the people who we can at least be able to usher on a different path. And I think those are people who've not become very hardened operatives, but this is an intelligence-led challenge. The aim of our effort is not to give terrorists a free pass. It is to divide the operatives from those we can influence away. The disengagement and rehabilitation effort is part of a countering violent extremism strategy that was launched by President Kenyatta this past Wednesday. Our view of that CVE, which is a phrase that started really in the United States, is simply for us that it articulates the prevention pillar of counterterrorism. We do not see it being a different thing that happens off to the side. Rather, it is intimately linked to intelligence, to the overall security effort, and its absolute metric is the use of all means to reduce radicalization and recruitment of Kenyans into terrorist organizations. We believe that that disengagement and rehabilitation effort only works best when it is coupled with strong security and counterterrorism measures. We do not believe you can prevent or rehabilitate from a position of weakness. In other words, Kenya does not envisage the movement towards prevention being a replacement for strong, consistent counterterrorism. Rather, it is merely to add a pillar of prevention to our efforts. Let me finish by saying that the threat of terrorism to a civilized global community cannot be overstated. The ideology of these groups insists on the destruction of democracies and free people. It insists on our capitulation or our mass murder if we resist. It is our recognition of this fact and the strengthening of our will that will allow us to unpuzzle terrorism enough to fight it successfully. We in Kenya want to be your partners. We want to be part of a collective fight. We do not want to be the afterthoughts to counterterrorism thinking. We do not want to hear a pantheon of attacks that are mostly Western, when in fact the similar kind of attack is being perpetrated amongst our people, a free people, a democratic people. We want your consideration that our lives and our losses are as great as anybody else's. And the reason for that is not merely some form of political correctness, but is because it is what builds us into true partners. It's not merely the training, it's not merely the technology. It is actually the consideration of each other and as human beings, full human beings who are in this fight together. I think that is the basis of true partnership. And we look forward to partnering. And I want to again thank all our partners who are seated here, but especially Israel, for always standing with us and being such a brave country in the midst of so much hatred. And we are proud to call you our friends, and I look forward to the rest of these engagements. Thank you.